All right, as a few more people are coming in, taking their seats, we'll get started in just a minute. Well, good morning, everyone. I am Mark Rozell. I serve as the Dean of the Schar School of Policy and Government here at George Mason University, and we are very proud to host the Michael V. Hayden Center. The Hayden Center has been a prominent voice in explaining and demystifying intelligence and national security issues. And for the past 8 years, it has been the Schar School's leading convener of public events with leading policymakers and thought leaders working in these areas. And this is what we do at the Schar School. This week alone, we've had events with Jack Smith, Vice President Mike Pence, and now today we are honored to have Senator Mark Warner back with us. So with that, I would like to introduce our event, the Hayden Center Director, Larry Pfeiffer. Larry?
Hey everybody, thank you all for coming. I know we usually do our events in the evening, so some of you probably had to wake up early today like me, so thank you for doing that and coming on out. Also welcome to our YouTube live stream audience. As Mark said, the Hayden Center is here to put a spotlight on intelligence and the role it plays in supporting policymakers or sometimes failing policymakers and figuring out what to do correctly moving forward. We do that through events like this. If you're not familiar with the Hayden Center and you'd like to know about our events as quickly as possible, go to our webpage, haydencenter.gmu.edu. You can sign up to get our notifications for our events and be amongst the first to be able to sign up. We were founded by General Hayden. General Hayden sends his regrets. He's unable to attend today due to a family commitment, longstanding family commitment, but he extends a warm welcome to the Senator and Jim. The event today is being broadcast live on C-SPAN 2. It's also being live streamed on our YouTube channel and recorded. We're going to have time for audience questions. Those of you in person, Jim will alert you to when he's getting ready to start calling on you. You can just start lining up at these two microphones in the aisles. We'd love for you to introduce yourself when you ask your question. We'd love you to keep your question nice and tidy and short. And the virtual audience, use the live chat function in YouTube. We'll be monitoring that, and I'll ask your questions on your behalf. With regards to today's event, this is a very, very important, vital conversation, I believe. Yesterday, Senator Mark Warner, the Vice Chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, took to the floor of the Senate to address his colleagues on his very grave concerns about the intelligence community, specifically regarding mismanagement, politicization, and interference with oversight, and the increased risk that brings to every American, every one of you in the audience here, everyone of you watching on YouTube. So today we welcome the senior senator from Virginia to share those concerns with us and to answer your questions about it. Guiding the conversation today is Jim Sciutto. You all know Jim from television, chief national security analyst and anchor at CNN since 2013. Earlier in his career, he worked for ABC News as a senior foreign correspondent, but he also served in the government as a chief of staff and senior advisor to the ambassador to China. So he's another Govey at heart, I guess. So with that, I will turn it over to the gentleman. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Mark. Thank you to Michael Hayden, old friend, who I wish I could be here as well. Thank you, Senator, for taking the time and giving me the opportunity to ask these questions. And thanks to all of you on this gorgeous day for spending the next hour of it inside. Senator, I enjoyed watching your speech yesterday, and it struck me that the core of your message is that this is not just a systemic risk, a breakdown of systems that we've had for years to ensure good intelligence, but that it is a security risk, that because you're breaking down those systems, that it makes the country less safe. Do I have that right?
You have it right, but let me just first of all, thank George Mason. I've spent a lot of time in this room over the years, and many supporters of George Mason, local elected officials. Dr. Rozell and I think we both kind of started in Virginia politics roughly at the same time. He on the commentator side, me as a helping a gubernatorial candidate in the mid-'80s, and it's great to see so many friends here. Yeah, I don't, as I started my talk yesterday on the floor, I don't go down and pound the podium a whole bunch in terms of the histrionics that a lot of folks use. But I am deeply, deeply concerned about what's happening. And, I say this as somebody who, 15, 16 years ago, it was relatively new to the IC. I'd been governor of Virginia when I got to the Senate, and had visited as governor some of the installations, but really, it was a strange way I ended up getting on the Intel committee, but it's been, frankly, the joy of my time in the Senate. And part of that has been getting to know the men and women who are in the IC, because while I have huge appreciation for men and women in uniform, the public recognizes them, gives them some of the approval. Folks in the IC, by the nature of their jobs, they are mostly not recognized, but they are so professional, committed. I've never had the foggiest notion what somebody's politics were. And I have, been on this for much more than a decade, and I've seen where they've got it right, I've seen where they've got it wrong, but there is always this move towards constant self-improvement. And what I've seen in these last 8 months that's been so stark and stunning is an effort to try to bend the IC, and I think they have been fighting back, but bend the IC to create a product that will be convenient for the current administration, or that will exclude people who they felt have not been as loyal to this administration, to the point that, I know, and I don't think this is just on the IC, but the whole notion that a vetting question for senior leadership of what do you think happened in the 2020 election? And if you don't answer appropriately, your ability to get a job is or advance. And what that makes us dangerous is the value of the intelligence community to speak truth to power and inform policymakers, the president, the Congress, the military, what our adversaries, competitors, friends are doing around the world. Part of that comes from human intelligence, what we classically think is human spying. Some of that comes from signals intelligence in terms of being able to listen in. Some of that comes from satellite operations. And if we don't have the best people, or if analysts feel they can't give an honest assessment without it hurting their career, that completely makes us, in a certain sense, flying blind, particularly in the case, I believe, of China, which I think the major issue of our time is technology competition with China. Obviously, Russia is an enormous challenge, but Russia was always a military threat and an ideological threat. China literally is competing, China's a great nation, with us in every technology domain. And if we don't have that ability to observe what's happening and plan ahead, and a lot of that comes from our intelligence community, then Americans are less safe. If we aren't able to use 75 years worth of relationships that we have built in formal alliances and informal alliances, and frankly through the use of soft power, so that at the end of the day we are kind of viewed as the good guys even when we do make many mistakes. And we've seen that soft power disappear. We've seen more and more time and again where people are starting, and nations around the world, long-term friends are starting to think, well, maybe China is a long-term better bet than America, a more stable bet. Then that undermines all of our national security and the safety of the American people. And this is just not normal. And it is exponentially different than it was in the first Trump administration. I disagreed with President Trump many times in the first administration. But for the most part, the folks who worked in that first administration adhered to rule of law. Not always the case, as some in the audience know. But for the most part, adhered to rule of law, felt like they they tried to protect the community. And in this case, particularly led by the Director of National Intelligence, Ms. Gabbard, who testified to our committee that she would never try to politicize the intelligence, and I believe has done the opposite. That leads to an undermining of all of our security, and I'm happy to go into as
Yeah.
much detail as anyone wants.
To your knowledge, has that political pressure already impacted assessments of the threat from Russia and Vladimir Putin? It struck me when I heard President Trump yesterday next to Keir Starmer say, and this is not the first time he said something along these lines, but the Ukraine war doesn't matter to the U.S. And he said, and he turned to Starmer and said, I don't think it matters to you either. He has quite a different view of Russia and Putin than, to my knowledge, the intelligence community has, and even a bipartisan majority on Capitol Hill.
84 senators, by the way.
Yes.
Been on the Russia extension sanctions list.
Are you aware that because of that pressure, folks inside the IC have at all doctored assessments of Putin or Russia to please the president's view?
Let me go through what we factually know. And this is not just applicable to Russia. We factually know senior intelligence officials who do the National Intelligence Council, who did an assessment when the president was trying to say, the Venezuelan gang Trinidad was directly involved with the Maduro government. And let me be clear, the gang are bad guys. The Maduro government is awful. The Venezuelan people voted overwhelmingly against him. They did an intelligence analysis that said both bad entities, but the direct relationship, not so much. They were relieved of their positions. We have seen recently 37 people with top-level security clearances removed by Director Gabbard, including in that revealing of something that was kind of the holy of holies, exposure of an undercover agent. We saw at the beginning of the administration complete carelessness when the Doge boys were around, and close to 400 CIA agents' identities revealed because of careless handling of their identities. Many of those agents now not able to serve abroad or undercover because their identities have been out. We've seen in the immediate aftermath of the so-called red carpet summit for President Putin, senior Russian analysts relieved of their positions. We have seen senior officials from the president's first national security advisor to the General Hawk at the NSA, to the director of the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. In the case of the national security advisor, Republican congressman. In the case of the NSA and the DIA, senior, still in uniform military officials, pushed out for a variety of reasons. In the case of DIA, it appears it was the case because their intelligence analysis of, we made great strides against the Iranian nuclear capabilities, but the notion that it had to fit in with the totally obliterated terminology the president used just wasn't true. All pushed out. We've seen, I'm sure we'll get to this as well, somebody that was so out of bounds, so out there on the extreme that she couldn't even get a position in the Trump administration. That's a fairly low bar. Miss Laura Loomer, who has taken no oath to the Constitution, who has a 9/11 defier, a proud white nationalist, somebody who has said some of the most racist, vile things about Muslims, proudly claimed that she helped push out the national security first advisor and certain people on the NSC staff, push out General Hawk, interfere with my ability to do oversight. So do I have a smoking gun that says, I know that intelligence has been corrupted? But if I would say no, but do I say, can you look at the pattern of behavior where people are having their jobs interfered with if the analysis doesn't meet whatever is the presidential moment or view from the White House at that moment, and will that have an effect? I believe absolutely, because I have had conversations with allied agency heads in their ICs saying, in effect, what the hell is going on? And with this, again, Ms. Gabbard's oftentimes appearance on Russian television, with Ms. Loomer's, I have no idea which political vantage point she's coming from, but would you share your most classified information with the United States at this point in terms of what's happening with the Ukraine-Russia war? Particularly when we've had, and this has been all in the press, and on and off again about whether the funds that have been committed to Ukraine by the American people that have been voted on by Congress are put on hold at various times for no reasons, where there is an on again, off again about how much intelligence we will share, whether it's within the 200-kilometer envelope outside the front line or beyond. The Ukrainians' frustration, at least at a private level, obviously, we've seen how the president treated President Zelensky that one time at the White House. But the Ukrainians have done a remarkable job. And for any president who feels like the war in Ukraine doesn't matter to the UK or doesn't matter to the US, one, hasn't read history. Two, remember Donald Trump said he would settle the Ukraine-Russia war day one. We are now about 9 months in, and Russia has played President Trump, I think, remarkably well. Russia is grinding away. And if anything, the guy that was supposed to stop the war day one, we now have Russia consciously or unconsciously sending mass number of drones into Poland. And any person who believes that Vladimir Putin will be satisfied with simply taking Ukraine and not thinking about the Baltics or Poland or reconstituting the old Soviet Union, I think is not a very good student of history or not a very good student of Vladimir Putin.
The assessments, statements, policy decisions that play down the threat from Russia or the war in Ukraine, your Republican colleagues know, based on their own voting history, right, including on this sanctions package that's still sitting on the back burner, they know them to be false. They know them to be contrary to the best assessments of Russia's intentions and so on. Do any of them say to you privately, we've got to do something to stop this, or even better, publicly, and I'm going to guess, I know just from the record that doesn't happen, but do any of them say to you privately, I'm with you and we have to do something about this?
I have, sometimes the regret of some of my Democratic colleagues. I absolutely believe you got to get things done bipartisan, because at the end of the day, this is not classified information, but it's secret. Congress doesn't always get it right. So if it's bipartisan, that means both sides got to help you fix it. And one of the most, crushing things, I've been so proud of the Intelligence Committee when I was chair and vice chair now, when Richard Burr was chair, vice chair, Marco Rubio. I worked well on some issues with Chairman Cotton, but I've had, and I will raise these issues, not to try to publicly embarrass, I raise them in the confines of a skiff. And virtually every Republican member of the committee has come up and said, Mark, you got to keep talking about it. You got to keep, we even had one member say a couple times, Mark, it's like you're a conscience. Candidly, I don't want to be your damn conscience. I want you to vote your conscience. And the pressure, particularly on more moderate Republicans right now, is enormous. But I think there is broad-based agreement, not just from the Intelligence Committee. I mean, remember this new bill about dramatically increasing Russian sanctions is led by Lindsey Graham. The reality of Putin's ambitions, the incredible ability of the Ukrainians to defend themselves and frankly change the whole nature of war by use of drones. I mean, some of our best things we've sent to Ukrainians, for example, our most advanced tanks, they can't even get to the front line now because I thought there was a kill field on 10 kilometers of each side of the front line. It's now more like 40 kilometers on each side. So, there are so many lessons that our military has to learn going forward. A whole different topic. But I think the vast majority of Congress, in both the House and Senate, get this. I mean, remember, the last time, that also included the TikTok ban, a bill back a number of months back, it was 80% in both the House and the Senate.
Yeah.
So the idea that somehow Vladimir Putin is somebody you can work with, history has proven that to be totally wrong.
The trouble is, despite bipartisan votes on, for instance, or preparations to pass something, they haven't passed it, on this new Russia sanctions bill or the TikTok ban, right? When push comes to shove, they don't act, right? And on TikTok, for instance, this was legislation passed by Congress by large bipartisan majorities. And again, to quote the president himself yesterday, "I like TikTok, it helped get me elected," and is now working on a deal to have it bought here. Does the sale, based on how it's described right now, one, solve the national security threat problems as assessed, in your view, and two, I mean, do you see the solution there in the ownership structure that they're talking about?
Listen, here's the irony of this. It was Donald Trump who first raised the concern about TikTok. Had become good personal friends. We were bike riding buddies. His Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, I had a great deal of respect for. I can remember we were doing a ride on a Sunday, and he was starting to deal with TikTok. I said, "Stephen, is this really a problem?" Mm-hmm. And I was reluctant. Then I did my research. Then I did my due diligence, and then I saw just to give you one example on like the Uyghur issue, nothing on TikTok about Uyghurs, 1,000x on Instagram or even Twitter at that point. So it's a very popular. I'm gonna reserve judgment until I see the details. Mm-hmm. But it was ironic that it was Trump that first raised this alarm. And as we've seen with the brutal murder of Charlie Kirk, the fact that we have so few trusted sources and the ability of social media platforms to frankly not only spread disinformation and exacerbate violence and exacerbate raw feelings, it's very powerful. And again, in this area, not just with TikTok, but with all the platforms, Congress gets a big fat zero. I've got 9 pieces of legislation starting in 2017, 8 of which are bipartisan, that we've not acted. And not just me. We still haven't passed the Kids Online Safety. We passed it, but the House wouldn't take up the Kids Online Safety Act. And again, because part of the challenge we've got now with the intelligence, let me bring it back to the IC for a minute. And we're asking the intelligence community to kind of move the giant ship, which used to be, can we spy on the opponent's government and basic military. National security is no longer who's got the most tanks and guns. It really is who's going to be the most successful in technology development. And so trying to move the IC to look at Huawei or, in China, a company that probably none of you heard of that you will be on your lips within the next couple of years, BGI, Beijing Genomics Institute, because what China is doing with bio and AI. Moving the enterprise to say, how do we look at things that used to be viewed as kind of more on the commercial side, where we are in huge competition, particularly with China, but with nation states around the world, is going to require a huge amount of effort, and the IC has been a bit slow. But what young person, because these people do this out of mission for country, because they take an oath to a constitution, not to a political party or a president, which young person is going to say, you know what, I'm going to give up X dollars to not go work at a tech company, to go be an analyst at CIA or at NSA, if you don't make your analyst fit whatever happens to be the political talking points of the day, you're not going to advance. If that doesn't drive home the fact that that makes all of us in our country weaker, then you're missing the whole premise.
I was at an event last night at dinner with a combination of Republican and Democratic lawmakers, whole host of folks from the defense industry and the DOD, now DOW, I suppose. And the one area of agreement was that this is a tech competition, right? When you're talking about the national security conflict with China in particular. That said, when we talk about political influence, we see that influence that space as well. I'll just give an example, and I'm sure you know him and dealt with him, but Doug Beck led the DIU at the Defense Department, comes from Apple, had good relationships, just got pushed out because he had donated to the Democratic Party. Do you see that space of competition being influenced by the same kind of pressures you're seeing in the IC?
Well, I know Doug. Doug, I think he was quite good. And they are literally going back on some of the people excluding a $50 or $100 contribution made a decade ago.
Yeah.
There has never been, to my knowledge, that level of litmus test. Frankly, not just from Democrat, but from prior Republican administrations. Yeah. So, and the thing that has constantly amazed me is, this is just not the way we operate. This has not been the case. I mean, see Andy McCabe in the front. This is not just with the IC. Look at what's happened at the FBI. For example, the president, when he celebrated the capture of the terrorist who was involved in the bombing as we were leaving Afghanistan, and got a great applause line at the State of the Union. Mm-hmm. What he failed to say was that FBI leader had been pushed out in the first few weeks of his administration.
Wow.
And the fact of the matter is that, number of FBI agents that are being, frankly, pushed out because they followed the law and whether they chose to or not, actually investigated the January 6th insurrection. Yeah. And that is grounds for firing. How this affects us as well. One of the things, again, under both Democrats and Republicans, including Trump's first administration, we realized that cybersecurity was a growing threat. CISA, with the cybersecurity agency, was actually formally stood up under Trump 1. We're not perfect, but it has been, in Trump 2, been decimated. Mm. Other cybersecurity expertise has been cut back, and as we think about this technology competition, with the amount of intellectual property that's being stolen on a regular basis, one of the advantages of China's got great research and great investment. They also steal $500 billion a year from intellectual property. That's a nice little boost to their economy. And if we don't have cyber protections, and perhaps in a way that's also, again, things we need to think through. In the first couple of months of this administration, people would often ask me, do you think we're going to have elections in 26? Do you think we're going to have elections in 28? And I would kind of think, guys, come on. We got differences, but let's not go over the top. Mm-hmm. When people ask me those questions right now, I got to, I hope and pray we will. And we've got an election in 25. The early voting started today for Virginia gubernatorial race. But when we see assaults against all parts of our democracy and free speech, and when you've got the government deciding we're going to yank your broadcast license if you criticize the president, this is not regular. And again, this is so counter from the first term. In many ways, the first Trump term, after the 2016 Russian intervention, and we never said they collaborated with the Trump campaign. We did say they had a bias. Mm-hmm. The first Trump administration did a damn good job on election security in 2020. Now, all of the mechanics of that election security is frankly being broke down. Most of the election security outfits across the intelligence community have been dismantled. Again, oftentimes led by Tulsi Gabbard. Mm. And if we don't keep our elections safe and secure, or if you see all the rabbit holes where we've seen cases brought against some of the voting systems and others. We got to make sure the voting systems are safe. But most of these have been thrown out by the courts, and you're dismissing your election infrastructure This is not normal times.
Is the effort to take away those protections from particularly foreign election interference because members of this administration don't see that as a real threat, or, and this is a difficult question, because they see potential advantage?
Even with all I'm seeing, I'm not going to go where that leading question led me.
It's not a leading question. President
But
Trump
I-
was asked in his first administration by George Stephanopoulos if he got information from a foreign power, would he take it? This was in the Oval Office, and he said yes.
The election threats from Russia, China, Iran, to a much smaller extent, but an extent North Korea, have not disappeared at all. And if we take down our guardrails, and frankly, the level of disinformation, the remarkable thing, in 2016, Russia had to create fake personas, oftentimes driven by by someone to appear to be American, to say crazy things, and then amplify that. Today, they don't have to create those fake personas. You can simply amplify actual American voices on either end of the extreme, or you can do it at a level of bots that make 2016 look like child's play. And as we go into an age where AI is going to continue to grow at exponentially fast rates, how does anybody find what's true versus what's not true? And I can assure you, interfering in an election is a hell of a lot cheaper than building an aircraft carrier. And if we don't acknowledge that and recognize that, and then if we don't have this comes, or it all brings it back to the intelligence community. If we don't have an intelligence community that is pointing out, here's what the Chinese MSS are doing, or here's what the Russians out of one of their various security agencies are doing, we as a country are made less safe. And I do think there is among some, an unwillingness to acknowledge that very real threat. I have seen, and again, as we saw, if we go back to the 2020 election, Chris Krebs, who I thought did a great job at CISA, got fired for saying it was actually a safe election. If that was 2020 and now you take that 10x in 2025, I don't care what political party any of us belong to or where we fall on the political agenda, but if we think that the notion of representative democracy with free and open elections, with free speech, if this doesn't worry you, then again, I don't know what will.
News today that U.S. attorney who did not find cause to investigate Letitia James, New York State Attorney General, was fired. What's your reaction to that?
Well, my reaction is that, my dear friend and partner Tim Kaine and I, when President Trump won this second time, we realized, he won. They get a choice. We have a chance to, vet our U.S. attorney candidates, but they have to be acceptable to this White House. They have to be conservative. They have to be Russian. They have to be a faux pas there. They have to be conservative. They have to be acceptable to Republicans. And we think we have found two great candidates. One, somebody who'd been very active in Virginia politics for the Western District. Two, a career official. And the Trump administration, the White House came back and said, Senators, thank you so much. You're the first state to move forward. This is an example of bipartisanship. Because people, they haven't had their full hearings. They were put in on a temporary basis in both cases. A couple months back, the Western District Attorney abruptly resigned. I'm not going to go into my conversation with him, but I think he was doing the right thing. And now the Eastern District Attorney, a U.S. Attorney, a very, maybe next to the Southern District in New York, or the U.S. Attorney in D.C., one of the most important, appears to be pushed out. So, because the question we asked were candidates, and all of them where, we understand, you work at the, you're going to work for this president, but at the end of the day, will you stand up for rule of law? And not knowing all the facts, let me be clear, but it appears that both of our choices met that criteria, and by meeting that criteria, they've lost their jobs. Again, you can take any of these incidents in isolation and say, well, I can explain away this or that. You cannot take all these incidents in together without drawing a conclusion. And it's why, again, and I'll be trying to lay this out in more detail, I'm not talking about a half dozen incidents within the intelligence community. I'm talking about literally dozens. And small item here, small item there, but in aggregate, it puts a chill on this community. And I so worry, what any of us say to our kids or grandkids, go work at the CIA, go work at the NSA, go work at the NGA. And in the NGA, National Geospatial Agency in Virginia, where I do, part of my job now is congressional oversight. There are only 17 of us in the Senate that even get to go to many of these facilities because we are read in, and as a chair or vice chair, which I've been for the last decade, I'm in what's called the so-called Gang of Eight. We get to see everything, the Holy of Holies. And part of my job is to go and visit these agencies, hear the management, yes, sit down with the workforce because there also happen to be Virginia constituents, and do a review. I've done it with Marco Rubio, I've done it with Richard Burr, 9 times out of 10 I do it alone. Because another politician doesn't want to schlep with you. And I'd had a long planned visit to the NGA. It was scheduled a couple of weeks ago. It had been scheduled for literally months. And it was a visit that wasn't even announced to the public. And the aforementioned Laura Loomer came out and started whacking me online, and strangely enough, 3 days before the visit, my visit got canceled. So one of the questions I ask is, and that was canceled by Pete Hegseth, DOD, it seems like Ms. Loomer, who's got no position, has taken no oath of office, has views that are beyond the extreme, is frankly driving DOD and driving the DNI, the intelligence community. And again, do we want that kind of individual who is so out of the norm that she couldn't even get a job in the Trump administration, what appears to be calling some of the shots? And please, again, don't believe me, read her own news feed where she claims credit for all of these firings over the last 8 months. And the number, this has been the one that, again, I wish folks would drive down. I've had a half dozen Republicans say to me, Mark, you're 100% right, but man, she came after me too. She is equal opportunity abuser. But you take away the ability to do oversight, you take away the ability to do oversight, and the intelligence community could at times go into excesses. The only reason we have the intelligence committees is because of the findings of, showing how old I am now, the church committee's reports into activities in the 50s, 60s, and 70s where the IC didn't have any oversight. You take that away, and particularly if you have leadership that is pressuring people to cook the books to fit a political agenda, and that makes us all less safe.
Yeah, I've had more than once, I had a Republican congressman tell me recently that he differed with the president on a key issue of national security. This congressman, a veteran, military veteran, and he said, I can't say that publicly because I would lose my seat. It's not, and those stories are not uncommon. Do you, and people ask me this because there's a commonality among the pressure that we're seeing applied to the IC, to prosecutors, to university campuses, to the news media, to law firms, the long list, get in line or be penalized. Do you see profiles encourage? I mean, the typical format is folks will criticize once they decide not to run, right? Or they've already been voted off the island. Do you see, can you name some, where folks have stood up at potential personal cost or professional cost?
I don't want to put my friends in more harm's way, but listen, I think Tim Kaine and I did pretty damn good choices of U.S. attorney candidates. I think there are, well, the thing that is probably, I've been doing this for a while, this job, governor, senator, that's been the single most disappointing and kind of heartbreaking, is there have been a half dozen times when there's been such an outrage, publicly or private, that I thought this will be the final straw.
Yeah.
This will finally break through. And so far, it mostly hasn't. And I've had, and again, this was, I think, even worse when Musk was affiliated with Trump. But the stories I've heard from Republican senators who have even moved towards opposing, the level of threats they get, and what is so sick and misogynistic is that not only is the member threatened, but oftentimes it is the family and almost entirely the daughters.
Yeah.
This is United States of America in 2025. Is this who we are as a people? I mean, I think, let me be the first to acknowledge, the Democrats screwed up the border under Biden. Border security is important, but you can be for border security and not be for masked ICE agents picking up moms as they drop off their kids to daycare or people going to work. I just pray that is not who we are as a country. And so far, you guys are here, or people who follow politics, but it's not penetrated through. I do think, the president said he was going to lower prices. I don't know anybody that thinks prices are lowered. This president has made America dramatically sicker already, and is on a path to even more. And I think the overreach on taking away health care will probably be where the battle will be fully joined. Because I can tell you in Virginia, your rates are going to come out in October, and they're going up. If you make, 80 grand in Arlington and a couple at about age 60, and then you buy through the Obamacare marketplace, your rates are going to go up $800 or $900 a month. Finally, a month, Rodney, a month. That's a lot, even in rich Fairfax County. But it's all this, and so far, maybe because, again, people are kind of turned off to politics, and so far, but you can't do the tariffs without having an effect. You can't lose America's soft power without having some effect. You can't, have the strains on the workforce. You can't take away health care from this many Americans without it actually cutting very deep. And again, we have a chance in Virginia to give a grade. It's not only about what's happening in Richmond, but it will be viewed as, as the first report card on President Trump.
Yeah, just the thing about threatening daughters stands out to me. Dr. Fauci, who I've known for years, we happen to go to the same all-boys Catholic high school in New York, a few years apart. He lives in my neighborhood, walks around with his large Secret Service detail as he has for years because of threats to him. But it's the direct threats to his daughters, which happened, at their homes, right? Where they live is the thing that really sits with him, as it would to any father, any parent. I have one more question, and I want to go to the audience. A lot of smart people here have a lot of things to ask. Do you believe that the Democrats, yourself included, have put up a credible opposition to what you see as the excesses of this administration? And given that you have a government shutdown fight coming here, is shutting down the government potentially worthwhile? And then a related question is asking for those ACA premiums enough of a sort of line in the sand for Democrats, or do you think that you need to show stronger opposition?
Listen, do I think in the first few months Democrats were disorganized and reeling? Yes. Do I think we have sharpened our opposition? Yes. Do I think that we can say to the American public, okay, we're just going to continue to presume that things are normal? Absolutely not. And we in Virginia, who've already taken it on the chin disproportionately, the number of federal workers we've lost, the ability to have, again, we didn't get to what the president did in terms of taking basic rights away from federal employees in terms of federal unions, what we've had happen with our universities under threat, our school divisions, our 5 local school divisions under threat right now in Northern Virginia. What I hear from Virginians, though, is they're prepared to join with me in making the comment, this is not acceptable. And the fight, I think, against a president that has dramatically cut research in healthcare, got a Secretary of Health that wouldn't acknowledge how many Americans died from COVID, and even in the same breath said that Trump ought to get a Nobel Prize for Operation Warp Speed, but wouldn't acknowledge the vaccine worked. And the fight around healthcare is, I think, a fight worth taking because, we've seen, and I say this to the media, I say this to the law firms, I say this to the business community. I think people thought, well, if we keep our head low, if we stay out of the harm's way, we're not gonna get hit. Bullshit. And one of the, I think about, I was down in a little town in Southeast Virginia, Franklin, Virginia. In all likelihood, their hospital's gonna close. The healthcare system, Bon Secours, didn't want to have me meet on the hospital grounds. Yet they come in and lobby like mad. Please, we got to restore the Medicaid cuts. We're going to get completely creamed if these tax subsidies go away. Our hospitals are going to... But the idea that you can argue to me on one hand and then say, but don't put my name in that. If we don't stand up, we're going to all get what we deserve. And we're going to be in a very different country. And I never thought we'd have this many changes in 8 months. We are only 8 months in. He only got sworn in on January 20th. If we don't fight now, then when? And how many more norms are going to be broken through? The thing, and I'll come back to the IC again, you take these genies out of the bottle, you can't fix them overnight. If we say to suddenly, okay, Canada, everything's fine again, and I have to acknowledge my mother's family came from Ontario. It's going to be a hell of a long time before Canadians start buying Virginia bourbon.
Yeah.
It's going to be a hell of a long time before our friends and allies around the world are going to say we can count on America again. It's going to be a hard time. And one of the things we've done, again, we've ignored Africa, the fate, for way too long. More people die in Sudan every day than Gaza and Ukraine combined. And yet when we allow American medicines to rot in Port Sudan because we won't pay the pennies to allow the aid to be delivered, it is wrong, and it's going to be a long time before people will say, hey, we're going to trust you. And China is coming in, lesser degree Russia. So these are things, even with the reversal of policy, the norms are broken. If you suddenly say it's okay to bend your analysis slightly, because it's going to curry favor with who's ever in the White House, simply changing policy, how do we change people's mindset back that we're going to, frankly, trust each other, that this is a country of extraordinary potential, that we can do everything? You take away that sense that we are that special, unique country that's actually viewed as the good guys. And those are not things you can reverse on a dime. So we got to have a fight. We're going to have a fight.
Thank you. I appreciate you taking my questions. I'll defer now to the audience. I imagine you're the MC for those.
Yes, so if you want to ask a question, please start lining up at the microphones in the 2 aisles here. And I'm going to go ahead and just field a couple quick ones here.
I can see this was the shy and retiring crowd.
Hey, these folks here, our audience is great. They
I know,
ask wonderful,
and I will try to be
respectful
short
questions.
on answers, which
Okay.
is hard for a senator.
So from our YouTube live stream audience, one is just a comment, and I won't mention the name, but she's a former CIA veteran, and she says, I'm a former CIA, and I can tell you your support of the IC is very much appreciated. Thank you for your commitment to your oath. So I just thought I'd pass that along. I'm sure she's not alone. As regards question, we have a question from an audience member, A.D. Patterson, who says, how well are we tracking China's developments in AI, and how deeply have they penetrated our university campus science, computer science, and AI departments and tech workforce? and then follows up with, should they be being granted visas? So we
Oh,
talked a little bit
great.
about that.
You know, for a long time, we turned a blind eye at universities to Chinese penetration. The Confucius Institutes, in many cases, were ways, to penetrate. The thing that was frightening is, these Chinese students at our universities are brilliant, and I think our secret sauce has been attracting the best and the brightest around the world. But what would happen in modern times is many of them, when they got into grad schools, where their family members back at home were threatened if they didn't bring back a thumb drive. So sorting through that, I think we've gotten better, but we've still got room to go. In terms of AI, in terms of the Intel community penetrating and monitoring Chinese AI progress, we got a long way to go. We still focus too much on the military and the government, and it was an embarrassment in my mind when we had to read in the newspaper that SMIC, one of the Chinese companies, had gotten down, I think, like the 6 or 7 nanometer on chips. We are pounding this. This is not. Bill Burns, I thought, was a great director. I pounded the heck out of him. We've still got improvement to go on moving the enterprise to not just thinking about military and government, but about technology development.
Thank you for your support, Senator. We appreciate it in the intelligence community. I teach both law enforcement and national security intelligence locally at a university, and my students are very concerned and would love to hear a message of hope from you. They are seeing themselves as like a lost generation of intelligence professionals. They can't find jobs. They have had internships, they're excellent students, and they're hopeless. Do you think that this administration will cause a true lost generation of intelligence professionals?
If it does, we're up the creek. I think, I don't really like the term abundance, but I do like the notion that we kind of grew up in a time when we thought in America there was no problem too big. And I think we've not lost that core of innovation, and we got to come back to it. Energy, housing, we could go through a series of areas. But one of the things that we didn't get to today that I think will be a big issue in 26, but a huge issue in 28, is the amount of job dislocation that's going to be driven by AI. And we don't, frankly, Mark Kelly, one of my friends, Senator from Arizona, has got some good ideas here, but we don't even know what to retrain for. I mean, if we go way back in time, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we thought, everybody become a computer programmer. No, that's not going to be the job. What do we retrain to? And frankly, there has to be some contribution from the enormous amount of wealth from the AI enterprises into owning some responsibility for this transformation, because that also is affecting the IC. But the biggest concern, which I'm threatening to hear, is those good, smart, independent-minded people who are doing this because of love of nation. I think they will think twice if they're being told, your vetting question of whether you get hired is, who do you think won the 2020 election?
Thank you.
Good morning, Senator. Gabriela Grabowska, senior in the Shar School from Ukraine, former congressional intern on the House side. So you mentioned Russian drones in Poland, but not many know that this is not the first time that Russia is invading the Polish airspace. In December 2022, we had 2 civilians from Poland killed. Then in November 2023, if I'm not mistaken, it was a missile. Now drones, which is a much bigger test from Russia. Having it been the Democratic leadership in power right now, what would an appropriate response be to this? Without escalating the situation to a full-scale combat in Poland, but also without letting Russia continue violating the international law like this. What will your party do?
Okay. Well, first of all, it's not just been Poland, it's been Romania as well. And Poland has called for the Article 4, not Article 5, where you've got to do consultation. I think what would have happened, and I think it would have been accepted by the vast majority of Republicans as well as Democrats, because I've seen even the most conservative parts of my state, I don't see any kind of love affair with Russia going on. I think we would have continued to supply the Ukrainians with the material they need and given them the intelligence, because they have been able, Russia has a lot more assets, but a continued flow of military equipment, I think would have bought them the time and space to get to a negotiated settlement. But when you cut that off, it's extraordinarily difficult. But you can't imagine, the Ukrainians last year domestically created about 2.5 million drones that are commit 4 million this year. What is going on in Ukraine in their supply chain is absolutely mind-blowing. And I still hear American defense contractors come in and say, oh, Senator, we got a great new drone. We brought it down to $18,000 a copy. Ukraine's talking about drones at $300 to $500 that they iterate 400 times in a single year. The whole nature of warfare is changing. Ukraine is leading the way. We need to support Ukraine, but we need to learn from Ukraine.
Good morning, Senator. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about some of the conversations that are happening in government spaces about how the administration is considering privatizing large parts of the intelligence community to avoid things like intelligence oversight or civil liberties protections like EO 12333, using companies like Palantir or Z, formerly Blackwater.
Yes. The IC has always used contractors. I don't think we're going to move away from that. I do think some of those companies I wouldn't characterize as negatively as maybe you would. But that's what the role of oversight is. And without a healthy, robust oversight, if the bad presumption that you're making is happening, we're not going to see it. So we got to do our job. And I will tell you not every one. The Blackwater, you got plenty of examples. There's, and we've obviously got a lot of contractors in Northern Virginia. The vast majority of the contractors in Northern Virginia, many of them former military, I think have a deep commitment to our country as well.
Hi, Senator. Thank you for being here today. My name is Jack Potter. I'm pursuing a master's in public administration here at the Schar School. I had the pleasure and privilege of interning at your Richmond office in the spring of 2022. So it's good to see you
you're going to sound like you're a biased questioner.
Not at all. So,
or you can say, why did you give me such a crappy
I'm not giving you a softball.
Okay.
My question is, to what extent do you think that the broad war powers delegated to by Congress and permitted by the courts to the executive over the past few decades have helped to incentivize the politicization of intelligence, which my premise being that given that a president knows that they can produce, if they can produce even the vaguest impression of an emergency or national security risk, they can take sweeping actions internationally outside much of the U.S. legal framework to help shape the domestic narrative.
You're right. And I want to compliment again my friend of, 47 years, 48 years, Tim Kaine, because he's taken the lead on this. Congress needed to restrict the War Powers Act. We've got close a couple times. I'm prepared to continue to be his wingman. And, we can see this case in point right now with what's going on off the coast of Venezuela. I don't know if these boats are for sure being manned by, drug runners. And, normal international law of the sea is you're supposed to shoot over somebody, actually try to catch them. And if you caught them and they're all drug dealers and there's, tons of drugs or fentanyl, wouldn't that make our case much better? So, you're a good intern, and that was a good question. I'm going to give Tim Kaine the credit. He's the lead, and he's right. Yes, sir.
Hello. Sorry about that. Still getting used to the microphone here. Hello, my name is Anderson Miles. I am an alumnus of the International Security Program, class of 2024, an early career professional in the intelligence field. Senator Warner, I want to ask you, some critics argue that the president's direct control over the intelligence community risks politicizing and weaponizing intelligence operations, including collection, analysis, dissemination, and covert activities, in ways that could undermine democratic norms, weaken oversight, and threaten civil liberties. Others caution such rhetoric itself can erode public trust in government institutions. From your perspective, are these concerns overstated, or do they represent a real risk to the functioning of our democracy?
I think your premise is correct. I can't, Jim asked me, do I have a smoking gun? I don't have a smoking gun, but I've got all of these incidents where people have been demoted or pushed out, not based on performance, but based on refusing to bend the knee. I have many examples of allied services who are concerned about sharing in the way we used to, because particularly vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine, Lord knows where it may end up. So I think the case is a very strong one, and there's not, I got folks from my team here, there's not a week that goes by that we don't hear from intelligence professionals who are scared for their careers, scared for their jobs, scared for their independence.
The author of I Am Not Your Enemy, Reality Winner, was the person who leaked the information about the cyber intrusion of the election systems. And she didn't know that it was just an opinion, that it was trying to influence the elections. But she got 5 years in prison for that. So there's another author of the book, Redfield's Warning, Robert Redfield, who says that the COVID was made by spy scientist Peter Daszak and Chinese woman Shi Zhenli. And the Reality's book is out now. Dr. Redfield's book is coming out 24th of October. So Trump and President Xi are meeting. You think they should agree to give up their two spies? Sidney Gottlieb was the most notorious spy. The Church Committee investigated him. He invented date rape drugs and all different kinds of assassin drugs and stuff. He skated. Terry Gross on Fresh Air had a really good interview with an expert.
Well, let me just, I'll try to read the book, sir, Mr. Redfield's book. I will say this, the actual origins of COVID, I'm not sure at this point. But, so continue to investigate that. But it again is a statement. There's been no transparency from the Chinese and on this, and again, that's a concern. But whether we'll ever fully know. But what we do know, that more than 1 million Americans died. What we do know is that the vaccines, that again, were generated because of American innovation and led by America, even though there was obviously European input as well, save lives. And when we can't even factually state that, then we're in a heap of trouble. Yeah. Please.
Good morning, Senator. Lucas Granis, first-year student at the Schar School, and I wanted to ask you, you've built a reputation on being a very bipartisan senator, and in such a polarized climate, what does it actually take to make bipartisan legislation work, and where do you see the next real opportunity for both parties to come together?
Great question. Listen, everything that happened at the end of Trump 1 and throughout Biden, candidly didn't actually happen through the normal, the bill becomes a law, and you go to this committee. It happened because there were about 10 of us. The Mitt Romneys, the Rob Portmans, the Joe Manchins, the Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, Jeanne Sheen, Mitt Romney and I bought every dinner for the last 7 or 8 years. And we came up with a consensus and said, okay, we're going to push this through even if it means grief from our own side. Many of those folks have retired. I'm prepared to buy as many dinners going forward as needed. But that's been the problem so far. And I hope, I think we'll see as we get through the government founding fight, there'll be an opportunity. I think my Republican colleagues have been almost afraid to meet. I got to respect that. But I think there is this understanding that we got to get back together. We got to find a way out. Ironically, the only, and I would have never predicted this, the only big bipartisan bill that's been done this Congress, at least in the Senate, I think also in the House, is the beginnings of crypto legislation around stablecoins. And listen, I came to this issue reluctantly because there's a lot of hair on that, but I think it's not going away and you needed to have American regulation. We just did the easier part called stablecoins. There may be market structure going forward. I do think there is a lot of interest around healthcare, which is a much bigger issue. And I just believe we got to put some points on the board bipartisan, because if I can find ways that my Republican colleagues can stand up on an issue, and the world doesn't end when they do. It's not like, because again, one of the things about President Trump, I think that we'd all acknowledge, it's not like he's loyal to any team or individual on an ongoing basis. So, please.
Thank you for coming this morning, Senator. I'm a Master's of Public Policy student here at Schar, and even in more ideal times, there's a difficulty in balancing a democratic need for transparency and accountability against intelligence work or intelligence being used for illiberal means. So my question is, what role do you see the intelligence community could or should play in preventing democratic erosion in this current era?
Oh, yeah, great question. You know, frankly, that's why our committee was set up in the first place, because some of the excesses where the IC went into other nations and went clearly against the democratic norms. One, I think it starts, it's got to continue with strict oversight. We do have, very strong rules that the intelligence community still adheres to about not doing regime change unless it is not doing regime change. And one of the areas, and this is kind of not a direct answer, but it is an area where I think our hands have been tied too much, and that's not an intervention in a democracy around the world, but we are still operating on a 1980s version around cyber, and we do much on cyber defense. We don't do, I think, near enough on cyber offense, and I think that puts our country at a huge disadvantage.
Thank you.
Well, I have to apologize. Am I on?
We can hear you.
Yeah.
So I got to apologize. Oh, there we go. I have to apologize. Somebody has to be the one to pull the hook, and I'm the guy who's going to pull the hook. I'd like to thank our audience. You guys have asked great questions. I apologize to those of you who weren't able to get to your questions. I want to thank Jim Sciutto for leading a wonderful conversation and asking some really insightful questions. And of course, I'd love to thank our senior senator from Virginia for making time to come out to one of his universities and engage us on what clearly is an issue of vital importance to our nation.
Can I get 30 seconds?
Absolutely, sir.
And the 30 seconds is, again, back to the professor who asked about optimism. We still live in the greatest country in the world. We still can have this open discussion here. I still think if you look at innovation almost across every domain, America still leads the way. So is this tough now? Absolutely. But in a historical context, this is relatively small compared to World War II, the beginnings of the Civil Rights Movement, the notion about women's rights, obviously Civil War. So we can get through this. But what is different now is there is this creeping change that I think, because people are so turned off to politics, it's kind of to heck with all of them. I know everybody's, probable sense when the news comes on. I want to throw a shoe at the TV. I feel the same way, and I'm inside the TV sometimes. But I beg of you, regardless of where you fall in the political spectrum, don't give up. The only way we can make these changes is at the voting booth, and is at keeping people like me held accountable. And I appeal to you, the biggest difference, I was a business guy before as a politician. In business, you get measured every year by what you get done. Too often in politics, we value the people who can tell you what they're against, but never what they get done. Hire people that can get to yes. Yes is never going to be perfect. Yes is never going to mean whatever side you're on, you're going to get 100%. But the only way we fail in this country is if we don't keep moving forward, trying new things, getting to yes, and at the end of the day, preserving what is the quintessential American, frankly, in this experiment in democracy. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to disagree without resorting to violence or without resorting to the kind of absolute awfulness that sometimes has become acceptable, particularly over the web.
Yeah.
We all got to be in the fight, and I thank you so much for coming out today. Thank you.
So if I would ask the audience to hold briefly, if you are a member of the press, the senators agreed to meet with you privately across the foyer in the multipurpose room to take a few questions. The rest of you, if you'd like to greet the senator, I would just ask, we're going to give the senator and his staff a chance to get across the hall, meet with the press. If you'd like, then, leave the auditorium and, wait out in the main lobby there, and I'm
And
sure
if a
you'd be
couple of
happy.
people that have got a burning question, I'll try to, give you a quick answer. So because again, I appreciate the good questions.
right.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you all.
Thanks, brother. Enjoy the conversation.
Enjoy it.
Thanks for taking the tough questions.
No,